School Photos and Their Afterlives is an exhibition that was shown at the Hood Museum of Art at Dartmouth College from January to March 2020. It was closed prematurely due to the coronavirus pandemic. I'm Mariana Hirsch, and I teach comparative literature at Columbia University.
I'm Leo Spitzer. I am a professor emeritus of history at Dartmouth College. So you might ask, why an exhibit on school photos? Certainly, school photos can be found almost everywhere across the globe, and they appear very early in the history of photography. And yet, historians and critics of photography have virtually ignored them, perhaps because they are so strictly conventional. Many artists from around the world, on the other hand, have engaged and they have reframed and they have animated school photos. And in so doing, they have opened them for our closer scrutiny. They have helped us to discover the important social and ideological functions that school photos have played and continue to play throughout the world.
Zelir boy kashir koyit yesi kurban tulak milini yaşadım late.
The Hood Museum provides an ideal space in which to stage this encounter between everyday archival images and works by artists who illuminate what school photos are, as well as what they do.
Walking through the gallery, we're invited to consider how photography can be used to enhance the power of state institutions, and also to think about how that institutional gaze could be dislodged. In this way, the exhibit encourages us to look closely at class photos, even while questioning the stories they tell and how they tell them. The exhibition begins with a series of works that help us understand what school photos do. You'll see that from a distance, the exhibit's title image, The Class, by Brazilian artist Vic Muniz, appears like a conventional class photo. But looking more closely, we see that it's actually constructed out of hundreds of found photos that have been cut up. And their assemblage illustrates how school and its technologies make citizens, integrating, assimilating, and transforming them into a collective. Similarly, Diane Meyer literally illustrates this process by stitching a community together through pedagogies of uniformity and inclusion.
My name is Diane Meyer, and recently I've been working on a series of hand-embroidered photographs based on found 1970s elementary school class pictures. In this series, the faces of the students are obscured by cross-stitch embroidery, which has been sewn directly into the photograph. And this is the back of the image. And it's meant to resemble the digital pixel structure of the photograph, setting up a connection between forgetting and digital file corruption, but also by obscuring what would normally be the most important part of the image. Other details come into focus, such as body language and other embodiments of social convention. And I was interested in how, even at a very young age, students were taught to pose, typically based on gender, and also how uniform class pictures were at this time across schools, across different states. I was interested in this time period not only because it is my own generation, but it is the last generation to grow up unclouded by digital imaging. And in this way, having one's photograph taken becomes a more formal event and one in which the participant is potentially more aware of being photographed.
The Japanese artist Tomoko Sawada photoshops and digitally combines 410 self-portraits to construct 10 class photos that humorously critique the conformity that educational institutions try to impose, and we show 9 of these in the gallery.
Hello, my name is Sandra Ramos. I am an artist originally from Havana, Cuba, but I have been living in Miami since 2003 that I decided to move to America. The piece, Matutino, is an etching aquatint print that I made in 2010, in which the main subject is the critique to this part of the Cuban education that have to do with double morality, adoctrination, and uniformation. In the piece, you can see this little girl with the red uniform that is a kind of alter ego, a symbol of my generation and the people born in Cuba after the revolution. This image is repeatedly in the piece and is saluting the flag, looking backwards. And in the start of the Cuban flag, what you can see is a sign of interrogation. So the piece is very related to the idea of the frustration of the utopian ideal of the Cuban Revolution and the crisis that we actually have in Cuban society after so many years of revolution.
The exhibit is organized along 2 major historical and geographical vectors: Europe and its others, and the United States and its others. It builds on the insight that technical innovations in photography in the second half of the 19th century coincided with the development of state-accredited education in Europe, in the Americas, and in the Euro-American colonies. And that in their efforts to manage religious and ethnic and racialized differences in their populations, national and imperial authorities used school photography to further their assimilationist and socially transformative ideologies. This exhibit invites us to notice the similar strategies promoting social integration as well as separation in vastly different socio-historical contexts.
So the first section on Europe and its others displays images from missionary, from private, and from public schools in the British Empire, the Habsburg Empire, the Ottoman, the Russian, and the Soviet empires. And these archival photos reveal how multi-ethnically integrated classrooms within Europe and segregated schools in European colonies nevertheless shared a common purpose, and that purpose was to induce students to conform and to become supporters, if not actually agents, of the ruling state. But there's also a flip side to integration. We see the fragility of the assimilationist projects in class photos of Armenian children before the 1915 genocide and of Jewish children before and during the Holocaust. These pictures reveal the other side of assimilationism: separation, exclusion, and murder. The conventions of school photography bring these common tactics into view, but they also show us how, at such moments of extremity, school photos became vehicles of communal resistance and of memorialization. The Argentinian artist Mirta Kupferming, for example, responds directly to photographic practices in the Nazi ghettos. In her work, Testimony for the Witness, she juxtaposes an image by the Nazi photographer Walter Genewein with the clandestine work of the Jewish photographer Mendel Grossman.
Esta obra es un tributo a la fotografía clandestina y a la figura de Mendel Grossman, quien fuera un prisionero en el gueto de Lodz y sacaba fotos para dejar testimonio en caso de que él y todos los habitantes del gueto no sobrevivieran. Él quiso contar lo que sus ojos estaban viendo, pero en esta obra aparece como muy protagonista una foto que sacó otra persona, Walter Genewein, quien era el contador del gueto de Lodz y que estaba afiliado al partido nazi, quien no tenía mucha intención de contar lo que estaba pasando, sino simplemente de hacer experiencias con los nuevos rollos ACFA que aparecían, por eso aquí aparecen en la obra tantas tiras de color y demás. La pregunta es, ¿qué es lo que estaban viendo esos chicos mientras estaban siendo fotografiados? Como en un juego de espejos, quise dar vuelta la escena y por eso creé esta espalda de los chicos y también esa sombra espectral que es la figura imaginada por mí de Mendel Grossman, que está íntegramente escrita a mano con la intención de hacer tributo a su vida. En el escrito se relata la vida de él y es el traer el aquí, a la hora, en mi mano actual, la vida de Mendel Grossman. Pero hay algo más. En el brillo de la lente de Walter Genewein aparece un rostro. Ese es el rostro de Mendel Grossman en una foto que él se sacó a sí mismo, casi una de las primeras selfies. Y contarás a tus hijos, dice el precepto. Y eso es lo que trato de hacer conmigo.
The section on the United States and its others illustrates how inequality and inequity are constitutive of every aspect of our social fabric, how they're constructed and how they're perpetuated and taught and learned, and with what courage and determination they have also been contested. The gallery's central wall features photographs from boarding schools created as transformative institutions for Native American children after the American Indian Wars and for African American children after the abolition of slavery. These schools used noted photographers like Nicholas Choate and Francis Benjamin Johnston to promote the assimilationism that eradicated Native cultures. So-called before and after images deliberately staged the effects of the school's conversionist practices.
The centerpiece of the exhibition is part of Carrie Mae Weems's majestic and extraordinary Hampton project. But Weems presents before and after in a radically different way. Johnston pictures the Black and Native students in static, timeless tableaus. Weems prints these on muslin banners, and so she can unfix them. She can undo the inevitability of the cultural genocide that the boarding schools represented.
Here and there, you peek out from behind history's veil, and glimmers of your brilliance can be seen in the contours, shapes, and dimensions of the New World. Before and after become the hallmark of your existence. Before the past and before the future, and after the opening of the sea. Before first contact, there are 1,001 tales of before and one after, maybe. Before Columbus and the invention of the New World. Before Stanley and Livingstone, the Portuguese, the Dutch, and King Leopold. Before the British and after the Revolution and the exacting hand of tyranny. Before Jefferson's democracy and after Jackson's invading army. Before Lewis and Clark and the Mason-Dixie line. Before Manifest Destiny, the march of industry, and the opening of the West. before the first trade beads were traded and after human flesh was weighed in gold, ounce for ounce for ounce.
In the exhibition, we show the culmination of segregationist policies in the extraordinary school photos from U.S. concentration camps for Japanese Americans during the Second World War. And we also show iconic school images from the movement to end segregation during the Jim Crow era and after. All of these images illustrate the important role of photography in the long-standing and still continuing struggles for equality in education for children of color in the United States. David Wojnarowicz and Lori Novak comment on the fraught history of inclusion and exclusion for queer children and for children of color in United States schools.
We end the exhibit with a third major section, Imagining Justice, and a series of works from Cuba, from Argentina, from Mexico, and from the US that use school photos as instruments of disobedience, of resistance, and as a call for solidarity and social change.
The class is the most important art piece I've made. This was like 22 years ago. I had just come back from my exile in Spain to Argentina, and I put together some meetings of my classmates in my home to know what happened with each one in their lives. It's a way of getting back to my roots. So I was taking portraits of all my classmates, and we understood that the two missing were empty spaces, were holes in our lives. So I started working on the piece for an event we organized to remember the missing. That is me here. It says, I'm a photographer and I miss Martin, who is my closest friend beside. And so are all of them, my friends. The missing is Martin, and the other one missing is Claudio. So all my work has started as a departure point with that piece in which memory, the idea of transmitting my experience to the new generation of students was there, because all what we wanted was to show them what we had lived, what we had gone through.
Lori Novak's video, Above the Fold, From Columbine to Parkland, accompanies and challenges us as we encounter the all-too-frequent above-the-fold images of school shootings and of protests against them in the media today.
So for the video I created for School Photos and Their Afterlives, I looked through the 20 years of front pages, starting with the Columbine shootings to the aftermath of the shootings at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida in 2018. I looked for photographs above the fold that focused on schools and education. Of the 96 photos above the fold that had to do with schools and education, 1/4, the most, were about shootings. So in the video, you're looking through all these front pages as I look at them, and you see me blink, you see me look. And so I'm asking you to look with me, to look through me, to look at me, and to think about what you're seeing, to think about the state of education, to think about what it means that there's so many images of children in failing schools, of children protesting climate change and shootings, as well as all the memorials and horrific images of school shootings. Hopefully, this will even inspire people to act.
And what will you do? Novak's blinking eyes and her question follow us throughout the gallery.